When the authorities of Mexico, Colombia, and the United States finally managed to bring down a major kingpin, cornering him in the mountains, closing in until his life was taken, or extraditing him to a foreign cell, they almost always found the same thing. Beside the man, there was a woman. He was found dead or on the run. She was left standing in the eye of the storm. And then the same old debate would begin. Were they blind wives, trapped victims, silent accomplices, or bosses in their own right? Every one of them swore innocence. In some cases that was true, but for most the reality was far murkier. These were the women who loved, feared, or served some of the most wanted men on the continent. Beauty queens, managers of vast fortunes, widows who inherited enemies and million-dollar debts. Discover what fates, some of reinvention, others of tragedy, awaited these wives, mothers, and lovers once their man's empire collapsed. 7 stories that begin at exactly the same point beside a kingpin and end in places nobody, not even they themselves, could have imagined. One became a model, another became a ghost. One ran an empire from the shadows. Another paid $120 million just to keep breathing. And one didn't even live to see her husband fall because the world she belonged to devoured her first. Let's start with the most recent and the most public of them all. The one who decided that stigma could be turned into a brand. Emma Coronel Aispuro, the beauty queen who became La Señora. There are women who stumble into the criminal world by accident and others who walk into it with their eyes wide open. Emma Coronel belongs to the second group. She was born on July 2, 1989, a United States citizen by birth, but she grew up in Angostura, a forgotten corner of the state of Durango with no running water and no electricity, and where the Coronel name already carried weight. She was the niece of Ignacio Nacho Coronel, one of the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel, who would be taken out in an operation in 2010. Emma's destiny bent, or perhaps took shape, when she was 17. At a local fair in Canelas, Durango, she was competing to be crowned queen of the Coffee and Guava Festival when a short man, 20 years her senior and already a legend, flooded the town with hundreds of armed men and announced publicly that he would marry her. That man was Joaquin Guzmán Loera, El Chapo. Emma won the local crown, and without knowing it, she won a front-row seat to the most talked-about criminal story of her generation. They married when she was 18 and he was twice her age. In the mountains, people began calling her La Señora. They had twin daughters, Maria Joaquina and Emily Guadalupe, born in a California hospital to guarantee them American citizenship. For years, Emma was the calm face behind the most wanted man on the planet. She went with him through his escapes, waited for him through his captures, defended him when the whole world condemned him. But loyalty has a price, and in her husband's world, that price is always collected. At El Chapo's trial in New York, intercepted messages revealed that she was no ordinary housewife detached from the business. Her husband gave her precise instructions on how to communicate, how to move, how to hold the empire together even from a prison cell. The image of the innocent wife crumbled in front of cameras from around the world. The trial left other wounds, far more intimate ones. In front of those same cameras, and in front of Emma herself, it was revealed that her husband had been involved with other women, one of them arrested years earlier in a raid targeting the kingpin, someone the cartel's operators described as his personal plaything. The Queen of the Mountains had to sit and listen in public as witnesses and prosecutors laid out the betrayals of the man for whom she had risked everything. Reports later circulated suggesting that Emma herself had been in contact with American agencies. A detail that, true or not, captured the impossible position these women end up in. Loyal on the outside, suspect on the inside, caught between a collapsing empire and a law closing in. Her own fall came in the early hours of February 22, 2021, when she was arrested at Dulles International Airport in Virginia. Months later, she pleaded guilty to trafficking of substances, money laundering, and conspiring to help her husband escape. The former beauty queen was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay nearly $1.5 million. At the hearing, her voice breaking, she apologized to a country that saw her only as the criminal's wife. She cooperated with prosecutors, and that cooperation cut her sentence short. On September 13, 2023, she walked out of federal custody. The woman who had lived among armed mountain camps and movie-worthy prison breaks got her freedom back with one condition: reinvent herself completely. And reinvent herself she did. Far from hiding, Emma Coronel chose the spotlight. She became a model. She walked at Milan Fashion Week, promoted shapewear brands, launched her own fitness guide, and showed up on social media with hundreds of thousands of followers. She turned into a public figure who flirts with the stigma instead of running from it, to the point of getting a tattoo of a pizza slice, the symbol of the faction of her former protectors. Before that, she had already appeared on an American television program about the relatives of criminal figures, and her name even inspired a song titled, fittingly, La Señora, performed by her former attorney. Every appearance fed the same paradox. The woman who said she wanted to protect her daughters from the criminal stigma was, at the very same time, building an entire career on top of it. In November 2025, she starred in her own documentary where she finally told in her own voice the story of her poor childhood, her first encounter with Guzmán, and the terror of that dawn in Mazatlan when federal forces broke down the hotel door while her daughters slept beside her. She recalled the moment when, as she tells it, armed men burst in shouting her husband's name and aimed rifles at her while all she could think about were the little girls at her side. It was, she said, the most frightening moment of her entire life. Today, in her 30s and under supervised release, she insists her only priority is her twins and that they grow up far from the stigma she herself chose to embrace. Her own family remains tangled in the courts. Several of her brothers are still behind bars or fighting extradition, named as part of the faction now battling for control of the cartel. El Chapo, for his part, is serving life in a maximum security prison and sends letters asking to be returned to Mexico, while the war between the factions that inherited his empire tears Sinaloa apart. She, meanwhile, is building a brand on the ruins of that empire. The woman who was once queen of the mountains now reigns on a runway. Nobody knows how long that reign will last. Victoria Eugenia Henao, the girl who married the most wanted man in Colombia. If Emma's story is that of a woman who embraced the spotlight, Victoria Eugenia Henao's is that of a woman who spent 3 decades running from it. She was born in 1961 in Palmira, Valle del Cauca, into a conservative family with no connection whatsoever to crime. She was barely 13 when a young man named Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, 11 years older and a friend of her brother, walked into her life. She married him at 15, still a child, while that ambitious young man was taking his first steps in the trafficking of substances. 2 children came from that union, Juan Pablo and Manuela, and alongside them grew the most brutal empire this continent has ever known, the Medellín cartel, which at its peak controlled the overwhelming majority of the white substance entering the United States. Pablo affectionately called her Tata, and that tender nickname hid a much darker reality. For years, Victoria lived surrounded by luxury and at the same time trapped by fear. In her autobiography and in several interviews, she described the abuse she endured from adolescence onward, the total submission, the domestic violence she suffered in silence, because leaving Pablo Escobar was never a realistic option. Doing so, she said, would probably have cost her her life. When she was barely a teenager, Pablo subjected her to experiences that marked her forever. Decisions made about her own body without her consent, in which she had no say at all. She carried that pain for more than 4 decades, unable to name it until many years later she found the courage to confess it to her own son, who listened, devastated, to the truth about the man he had admired. She lived surrounded by luxury and at the same time by pure terror. A car packed with hundreds of kilos of explosives detonated outside her home. Threats arrived constantly, and she survived kidnapping attempts against herself and her children. Years later, in therapy, professionals helped her put a name to what she had lived through. She discovered, as she put it bluntly, that she had shared her life with a psychopath. On December 2, 1993, Pablo Escobar's life was taken on the rooftops of a Medellín house as he fled barefoot from the authorities. For the rest of the world, that date marked the end of an era of violence. For Victoria and her children, it brought no relief, only the beginning of a different nightmare. The Kingpin's enemies wanted their debts settled, and her eldest son, barely a teenager, was seen as the heir to the throne. The widow had to sit down and negotiate with her husband's rivals. According to her own account, around 40 criminal organizations came to collect debts totaling more than $120 million. She handed over properties, cash, even assets already seized by the state. That payment, brutal and humiliating, was the price of staying alive. What followed was a flight that took her halfway around the world. 17 countries denied her asylum. Finally, Argentina took her in. There, Victoria Eugenia Henao ceased to exist on paper. She became Maria Isabel Santos Caballero, and her children took on new identities as well. Buenos Aires promised to be the final refuge, but the past caught up with her even in exile. In 1999, she was arrested alongside her son on charges of money laundering and criminal association. She spent 18 months in a concrete cell 1 meter by 3 with a latrine and a tiny window. Her daughter was expelled from 2 schools. Years later, Argentina's Supreme Court cleared her completely. A Nobel Peace Prize laureate even interceded on her behalf, convinced that her only crime had been carrying the Escobar name. Today, more than 3 decades after the Kingpin's death, Maria Isabel lives a quiet life that she rebuilt piece by piece. She discovered personal development work in the mid-90s, trained as a coach, certified by international bodies, became a public speaker and an author, published a memoir translated into 14 languages, was named Woman of the Year at a ceremony in Montevideo, and starred in documentaries about her own life. She has insisted over and over that the cold, complicit woman portrayed in television series has nothing to do with the reality of terror and submission she actually lived. The fictional version shows her as a queen of the empire. The real one, she says, was a prisoner in a golden collar. Her son became an advocate for peace who rejects his father's legacy. Her daughter chose absolute anonymity somewhere in Buenos Aires. The woman who once slept beside the most feared man in Colombia spent the rest of her life proving that it's possible to be reborn from chaos. But she also admits that Pablo's shadow never fully fades. Even today, when she's alone, she asks herself how she managed to survive so many moments when her life hung by a thread. Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, the boss who ran an empire from the shadows. There are wives who were decoration and wives who were power. Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia belongs without question to the second group. She was born in 1963 in El Naranjo, a community in the municipality of Aguilar, Michoacán, the heartland of one of the most powerful criminal dynasties in Mexico. The Gonzalez Valencia family, known as Los Quines, identified as the financial arm of an entire cartel. Rosalinda didn't enter the criminal world for love. She was already swimming in it by blood. Her brothers ran roots and fortunes, and it was precisely in that world that she met a man who started out guarding the clan's green substance plantations and ended up becoming the most wanted criminal in the hemisphere. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho. Their marriage was far more than a romantic bond. It was a merger between 2 powers. They had 3 children, among them Ruben Oseguera, El Menchito, identified as the organization's second in command, while El Mencho built and expanded the cartel into one of the most feared in the country. Rosalinda did something equally decisive, though invisible. She managed the money. Authorities identified her as one of the organization's leading financial operators, overseeing dozens of front companies. In the criminal world, they gave her a nickname that said it all, La Jefa. She wasn't the boss's wife. In practice, she was a boss in her own right. Her history with the Kingpin wasn't simple or linear either. Before El Mencho, Rosalinda had been linked to another leader of the old Milenio cartel, out of which would later emerge the factions that fought with extreme violence over the west of the country. When that structure split apart, she ended up on the winning side, beside the man who had once guarded her family's fields and was now becoming the most wanted criminal on the continent. Theirs was an alliance of blood and money built on decades of shared business between two clans. The law took a long time to reach her, and when it did, she absorbed every blow. She was arrested for the first time in May 2018 in Zapopan, Jalisco, accused of money laundering but walked free after posting a multi-million-dollar bond. In November 2021, she was recaptured for violating the terms of her release. This time, there was no quick exit. In December 2023, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison for concealing illicit operations in an account tied to the cartel. Prosecutors tried to go further and charge her with organized crime, a charge that could have buried her for decades. But in November 2024, a court threw out the accusation for lack of sufficient evidence. Rosalinda had her lawyers, she had her resources, and she had something more: the patience of someone who knows how to wait. The waiting paid off. On January 29, 2025, a federal judge in Morelos determined that she had served more than 60% of her sentence and ordered her early release for good behavior. In late February, she walked out of the women's prison with a calm smile, her hair pulled back, without giving the press a single statement. She got into a truck and left to rebuild her life in Guadalajara, with only one obligation: to check in with the authorities each month and hold a lawful job. She regained her freedom just in time to face the greatest loss of all. On February 22, 2026, during a military operation in the mountains of Tapalpa, Jalisco, El Mencho was gravely wounded and died while being transported. The man who had evaded two governments for over a decade finally fell, and his death unleashed a wave of violence that paralyzed half the country. Rosalinda, the administrator who had survived prison, became a widow overnight. The hunt for her descendants had begun long before. Her son, El Menchito, had been arrested years earlier and extradited to the United States, where he ended up sentenced to life. One of her daughters was also imprisoned there before regaining her freedom. And after Rosalinda's release, her other close relatives remained squarely in the sights of authorities, offering millions of dollars for information leading to the kingpin. One by one, the links in the family chain fell. Her son, El Menchito, is serving life in the United States. She, La Jefa, remains free, watching up close as the empire she helped build rearranges itself. The only woman on this list who not only survived the kingpin's fall, but saw it coming from the inside. Rosario Niebla Cardoza, the lifelong love who became a businesswoman of crime. In a world full of fleeting lovers and marriages of convenience, the story of Rosario Niebla Cardoza is almost an exception. A love that survived everything, even the most dangerous business on the planet. She was born on October 6, 1946 in El Dorado, a district of Culiacan, Sinaloa. She met the man of her life when they were both just children, at an uncle's butcher shop where he worked and where she went to buy meat for her family. That shy, hard-working boy was named Ismael Zambada Garcia. The world would come to know him as El Mayo, co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel and for decades the most elusive kingpin in Mexico, the only major boss who never set foot in a prison in his own country. They fell in love as teenagers. He was 17 and she was 19 when, as family legend tells it, he ran off with her and they fled together. They married in church and then in a civil ceremony bound, as he himself would put it, by 3 laws: the law of the mountains, the law of God, and the law of man. They had 5 children, 4 daughters, and 1 son, Jesus Vicente, El Vicentillo, the kingpin's favorite. Over the years, El Mayo had many other partners and children scattered across the mountains. In a famous interview granted to a Mexican journalist in 2010, the kingpin himself admitted to living surrounded by several women and a large brood of children. All of them, he said, children of the mountains like him. From those other relationships came sons who would in time fight over the leadership of the cartel. But above all of them, he always made clear who owned his heart. He called her Chayito, and he reserved for her a title no one else ever had: First Wife, Great Love, Eternal Queen. Much of this intimate story came to light through the testimony of the family's attorney, collected in a book that exposed the best-kept secrets of the most discreet kingpin in Mexico. While El Mayo sank deeper and deeper into the world of controlled substances, Chayito became something else, a businesswoman. The United States government flagged her back in 2007 as a key piece of the network laundering money for the organization in the Culiacan area. In her name, or with her as majority shareholder, there appeared dairies, cattle ranches, construction firms, gas stations, even a daycare center. Behind every seemingly innocent front, the financial machinery of a criminal empire was humming. Her 4 daughters were eventually flagged by American authorities as well, folded into the same machine. The entire family had become an extension of the business, with Rosario as its discreet and powerful matriarch. The Kingpin's fall came in the most unexpected way imaginable. On July 25, 2024, El Mayo, the man who had never been captured, landed at an airport near El Paso, Texas, and was arrested by American federal agents under circumstances that still raise questions today. He was traveling on the same aircraft as one of El Chapo's sons. In August 2025, he pleaded guilty in a United States court to avoid trial. The only one of the cartel's great founders who had seemed untouchable for half a century, ended up laying down his arms in a foreign cell. His son El Vicentillo had already been imprisoned there for years, and his fall split the Sinaloa cartel in two, unleashing a ferocious internal war between factions that set the streets of Culiacan on fire. That war reached the next generation too. One of the sons the Kingpin had with another woman emerged as the leader of one of the warring factions. And by 2026, one of Chayito's daughters was detained during a military operation in the Sinaloan mountains before being released when no charges were found against her. The entire family was caught in the crossfire of an organization devouring itself. In the middle of that earthquake, Rosario Niebla stayed true to what she had done all her life. She remained invisible. She is around 80 years old today, sheltered in the same Sinaloan mountains where the love story began and where the empire was born as well. She has never set foot in a prison. She remains as the Kingpin himself defined her, the queen of a heart that not even extradition could put out. While her husband awaits sentencing thousands of miles away, she keeps her silence, guarding the secrets of a fortune the whole world would love to trace. Diana Espinosa Aguilar, the beauty queen who fell in love behind bars. Some underworld love stories begin at a party, on a ranch, or in a hall full of armed men. Diana Espinosa Aguilar's began in the least romantic place imaginable, a maximum security prison. A native of Mata, Chihuahua, very fair-skinned with large eyes and refined manners. Diana arrived at the Puente Grande prison in Jalisco in 2008. She had been arrested alongside her partner at the time, a Colombian kingpin tied to a powerful criminal organization and charged with handling money of illicit origin, weapons possession, and organized crime. Inside those gray walls, as her life seemed to be falling apart, something extraordinary happened. In 2010, Diana was crowned beauty queen of a pageant held inside the prison itself. There's one detail that links her story to the first woman on this list. Like Emma Coronel, Diana was also a beauty queen. She also defended her kingpin publicly, and the two even bear a certain physical resemblance despite the age gap. Two crowns, two empires, two destinies that would rhyme over the years. That prison crown changed the course of Diana's life. In another wing of the same facility, one of the most legendary criminals in Mexican history was serving his sentence. Rafael Caro Quintero, El Narco de Narcos, co-founder of the defunct Guadalajara cartel, convicted for his role in the death of an American anti-narcotics agent in 1985. Caro Quintero saw Diana on television during the broadcast of that pageant and was struck. With help from other inmates, he got her number and they began speaking twice a day, every day, for months. When a judge ruled her not criminally responsible and she walked free, the relationship didn't end. It grew stronger. And when Caro Quintero was released in 2013 due to a flaw in his case, they married and started a family. But the romance was marked by pursuit from the very start. Months after his release, the Kingpin was hit with a new arrest warrant, this time with the United States offering millions for his capture. In 2016, the U.S. Treasury Department added Diana to its blacklist of individuals tied to the trafficking of substances, identifying her as her husband's financial right hand and the administrator of assets acquired with illicit money. Diana denied all of it, forcefully. She insisted in interviews that she had never been involved in the business, that she lived modestly off a monthly allowance from her mother-in-law, and that her only occupation was her home. It was, she maintained, a profoundly dishonest accusation. Inside the prison, the other women had nicknamed her La Diva, and something of that fascination with her husband's figure stayed with her even in freedom. For a time, she attempted to legally register the Kingpin's name as a trademark, with an eye on television programs and publications, as if the surname that condemned her could also be turned into a business of her own. Meanwhile, her husband remained a fugitive, and she carried the stigma along with the freezing of any asset she might hold under American jurisdiction. The strain eventually broke the bond. In 2023, Diana publicly announced that she had filed for divorce. The reason, she said, was to protect her children. She wanted them to grow up with nothing to do with the criminal world, far from the humiliations the family name had brought them. And yet, in the very same interview where she announced the separation, she confessed something that gave her away. She was still in love with the Kingpin. Love and survival were pulling her in opposite directions. Caro Quintero's definitive fall came shortly after. Recaptured in Mexico in 2022, he was extradited to the United States in February 2025, along with 28 other criminals handed over to American justice to face the charges the U.S. enforcement agency had never forgotten. El Narco de Narcos, who had dodged justice for nearly 4 decades, ended up in a cell in the country that hated him most. Diana Espinosa, the beauty queen who fell in love behind bars, was left on the other side of the wall, trying to salvage the only things that mattered to her from that shipwreck: her children and her own name. Guadalupe Leja Serrano, the wife whose tragedy ignited a war. Not every woman in this story survived the fall of her Kingpin. Some fell long before he did, and their end was so brutal that it ended up defining the fate of an entire empire. Guadalupe Leja Serrano was one of them. She lived on the margins of Mexico's trafficking of substances in the late 1980s, and her identity was defined almost entirely by her marriage to Hector Luis Palma Salazar, El Güero Palma, one of the founders of the Sinaloa cartel. The details of her life before that marriage are scarce, almost non-existent. She was a young woman whose existence revolved around her family, her husband, and her 2 small children, inside a world where alliances and hatreds could flip in an instant. That instant arrived in the form of a betrayal. At the time, a fierce dispute was erupting inside the old Guadalajara cartel, and El Güero's rivals, linked to the brothers who controlled the Tijuana territory, designed a revenge as twisted as it was effective. They planted a Venezuelan operator named Rafael Clavel Moreno inside Palma's circle, a charming and utterly unscrupulous man whose mission was to destroy the Kingpin from within, where it would hurt most. Clavel first won the family's trust, then got close to Guadalupe. While El Güero traveled oblivious to it all, that man seduced his wife and convinced her to run. Guadalupe pulled an enormous sum of money from her husband's accounts and fled with her 2 children and her lover toward the United States. She believed she was starting a new life. In reality, she was walking straight into a trap. What followed was a cruelty that shocked even a world accustomed to violence. Clavel, who had never loved Guadalupe but had simply followed an order, took her life in a hotel in a particularly brutal way, and then, in a macabre gesture designed to break his enemy, made sure El Güero Palma received proof of her death. Not satisfied with that, he took the Kingpin's 2 small children to Venezuela, where he took their lives as well. In a matter of days, El Güero lost everything he loved, his wife and his 2 children wiped out not by chance but as a calculated message of terror. Guadalupe Leja's tragedy was not the end of a story but the trigger for another. It lit in Palma a thirst for revenge that would fuel for years a brutal and merciless war between the Sinaloa and Tijuana factions. A chain of reprisals that crossed borders and cost dozens of lives. The man behind that betrayal didn't live long to tell the tale. He was captured and confessed to the crimes, and a chain of reprisals soon swept away several of the people around him. Revenge, in that world, never stops at a single person. Her name was carved into the dark history of the trafficking of substances, and her grave, in a famous Culiacan cemetery known for its opulent mausoleums, became a kind of marble archive where the mother is still remembered alongside her children. Guadalupe died before her husband fell, but her ghost haunted him for the rest of his life. The Kingpin's own fate was almost as novelistic as her tragedy. Years later, he survived the crash of his private plane and was captured by the army while trying to escape disguised as a police officer. He spent long stretches in prisons in Mexico and the United States. Every time he seemed on the verge of walking free, a new charge sent him back behind bars. Today, El Güero Palma, elderly and ill, remains locked in a maximum security prison, still carrying the weight of a loss that no amount of revenge could ever repair. The woman a rival used as a weapon to destroy him ended up destroying him in another way, turning him into a man defined by absence for the rest of his days. Sonia Barragan Perez, the ghost who vanished off the map. And so we come to the last one, who is also the most elusive of them all. Because if some of these women chose the spotlight and others carried the stigma in plain view, Sonia Barragan Perez did something entirely different. She simply disappeared. She was the last wife of Amado Carrillo Fuentes, El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies, the man who led the Juarez cartel and revolutionized the trafficking of substances by using a fleet of aircraft to move colossal loads across borders. At its height, that kingpin's fortune ranked among the largest ever produced by organized crime. And at his side, always discreet, always in the background, stood Sonia. Almost nothing is known about her. She was born in Mexico in the early 1960s, had 3 children with the kingpin, and filled the traditional role of the wife who holds the household together while her husband runs one of the most sophisticated criminal empires in Latin America. Her life in that man's shadow was, by definition, invisible. She gave no interviews. She appeared at no public events. She left no trace in the newspapers. Like many women in that world, she lived protected by a culture of silence in which anonymity was the surest way to stay alive. But even in that darkness, there was one moment when Sonia showed what she was made of. According to the testimony of one survivor, when the cartel's leadership gave the order to eliminate the people who had taken part in a certain plan of the Kingpins, it was Sonia herself who defied that order and phoned one of the threatened families to give them just a few minutes head start to escape. In a world where loyalty is paid for with your own life, that act of compassion was also an act of enormous courage. Her husband's fall came in an almost surreal way. In July 1997, Amado Carrillo Fuentes died on an operating table during a lengthy cosmetic surgery meant to change his face so he could vanish and slip past the authorities of 2 countries. The man who had built an empire in the skies faded out, trying to erase his own face. His death was never free of suspicion. 4 months later, the doctors who had operated on him were found killed in a particularly brutal way, an ending that cast doubt on what had really happened in that operating room. And from that moment on, Sonia's shadow grew even deeper. An arrest warrant hung over her, issued back in 2005 for alleged operations with resources of illicit origin, as part of the sweeping legal case the Mexican state brought against the cartel's entire leadership, a case that came to include dozens of arrest warrants against the heaviest names in the organized crime of that era, among them her own brother-in-law. Each time one of those relatives fell, the unease closed in on Sonia again, who knew her surname was still a target. That's why for years she moved like a shadow. She would file a legal appeal, disappear, resurface only when absolutely necessary, and vanish once more. For years she pursued legal remedies to avoid arrest, appearing and disappearing from the radar as the pressure of the law rose and fell. It's speculated that she inherited part of an incalculable fortune, or that much of it was frozen and hidden away. But that's all it is. Speculation. There are no interviews, no recent photographs, no confirmed sightings. Nobody knows for certain where Sonia Barragan Perez is, or how she lives, or even whether the warrant hanging over her still means anything at all. The wife of the man who ruled the skies became, in the end, the most perfect of ghosts. A woman whose story remains open to this day, with far more questions than answers. Lost somewhere between myth, rumor, and absolute silence.